I now believe I'm ready.
All right, Ms. Baxter, thanks for coming in for your Cycle 1 pre-conference. As you know, we've done this a lot of times already. Basically, this is your opportunity to talk to me about what you're going to be teaching when I come to observe you, and sort of why you're going to be teaching it, and the data that supports what you're doing with your different groups of students. I'll be scoring you on 4 elements today. You, however, can feel free to talk about your lesson in whatever order you like. So you can start wherever you want, and I'll be able to put the data where it belongs according to the element. So just feel free. Why don't we just start with telling you what you're teaching, what your objective is, and basically what everything's going to look like.
Okay, perfect. So I'm actually going to, can I back it up just a little bit?
Sure.
To where we just are wrapping up? Okay.
Start where
Because, so this week we're about to start our second unit in reading and for science and social studies, which meant that literally today we took our unit test for August. So looking back at the beginning of the school year for our August calendar, we focus on integrating our reading standards with social studies and science. So you'll notice that each daily objective was focused around not only an ELA standard, but also for the first month, a social studies standard. So where we were is we started focusing on character traits, and we aligned this because it is a huge standard, not only in Galileo, but it's also kind of seen across the board. So we felt like it was a pretty prominent standard to start with. And looking at the year-long Roosevelt School District curriculum guide, they wanted us for the first quarter to focus on the United States and government. So looking at those 2 standards, it matched up really nicely because part of the focus for government was talking about what are traits of a good citizen and what are traits of people that live in a democratic environment. So being able to apply character traits that was found in the ELA standard along with pairing it up in the United States and government unit worked out really well. So for pretty much the first week, we reviewed going through if we're stuck on a word, how do we decode it. So we did that for the first week, talked about that, and then once we actually got into the unit, we focused on character traits, so feelings, motivations, and character traits, and then we started diving into talking about what a democracy is, defining those key elements, and then going deeper into what kind of people, for instance, the president who's in the executive branch, what kind of traits does he have and why. Looking at our previous history and talking about Ruby Bridges and what traits she possessed in, and we linked that with the judicial branch and making laws fair. So overall, we're wrapping up with our unit tests today, which combine doing the character traits and the standards of the U.S. government, which led nicely into September's focus. So September, we're focusing on now going into the science portion of the quarter. This unit is focused on plants, animals, and ecosystems, and we link this with 2 major ELA standards. The first one is main idea and details, and then cause and effect. We thought, again, these 2 standards are, again, very large standards in our ELA curriculum, knowing that a student needs to be able to comprehend what they're reading and then be able to retell in order to access any other information is huge. So we thought that that was really important coming into this next unit. So we're starting this week with doing key details. So we're starting out smaller, being able to identify what is an important detail versus not important, and then being able to determine 3 details using a top-down graphic organizer, and then eventually we'll move into being able to take those details and figure out a main idea from them, and then also a topic. So we're taking it piece by piece and kind of spiraling it. in order to help them be able to summarize at the level that we're expecting. And with that, we are focusing the beginning of our Plants, Animals, and Ecosystems unit with the topic of plants. So we're starting with very simplistic, going into looking at a plant and talking about what are the structures of a plant. So understanding that a structure is a part of a plant and being able to identify each of those, which is literally the exact standard. So that's Wednesday, and that's going to be tomorrow, the startup of the unit. Thursday is going to be the lesson that you'll be observing. Again, we'll be focusing on the details using the top-down graphic organizer. And then after they've been able to identify the structures of a plant, we're now going to be looking at how do we understand what each of these structures does and how does it function in order to allow the plant to survive. So again, spiraling off of starting at a more simplistic objective and then working about how the parts work together. Friday will be then talking about more of the real world way that we use plants and why they're so important to our environment. So we're going to be thinking as a big question throughout the unit, why do we need plants in order to survive? And what would happen if we did not have plants. But that's really going to come into play on Friday when we delve into looking at different plants that we would find. So for instance, we're going to be bringing in like food and soap and perfume and medicine, and all these different things have a lot of parts of plants that they use to make them, and talking about what are those significant structures that they're finding in those things, and then talking about how they provide us with things that we need in our life. So as far as understanding if we were ready for this, so looking at August, they took their assessment today. So that data isn't in there, although looking at the exit tickets that we have taken throughout the unit, looking at overall, talking about the law process, character traits, executive branch, the legislative, judicial.
Can you send that to the printer?
Yep.
Thanks.
I can do it when I'm done because this isn't hooked up. But looking at this, like you'll notice on each of these, 14 out of the 17 students that took this assessment, 82% of the class was able to master 80% or more on that exit ticket. Same with character traits. 16 out of the 20 students in the class were able to master the objective, so that was 88%. We had a couple of them that were at 65% of the class and 75%, but I still felt like that was a strong enough number to be able to push forward. And for those, like, I pulled a small group and it was fine after the reteach. But just looking at the exit tickets, we felt as a third grade today like they were ready to take their assessment and do it well. So looking at that, we knew that we were ready to move into Unit 2 and begin science. So understanding where my students were at in terms of the lesson objective for this week. So I gave the students a diagnostic assessment to see where their level of mastery is at, to know whether or not, is this something I actually need to teach? Do they know it? Can I just skip over it because they already know all this information? So looking at that, the lesson again is focused on two standards. The first one is, sorry, let me flip to Thursday. The first one is nonfiction standard, determining key details from a text using a top-down web. And then the second standard is the science strand, which would be describing the function of the following plant structures. And that includes seeds, roots, stems, leaves, and flowers. So in my assessment, in my diagnostic assessment, I required that both of these were measured in order to see if this was needed to be taught. And kind of, it also helped me a lot focus on the misconceptions that my students may have coming into the lesson, and also just kind of what knowledge they already carried. So looking at this, none of my students were able to master at all. I mean, and our mastery level is set at 80%. You can see the highest that a student was able to master here was 60% on the diagnostic. And a lot of it stemmed from both not being able to fully give 3 major details of the story, and also just not understanding. A lot of them didn't understand what a function was. That was a question that was asked a lot. A lot of them were able to maybe come up with an answer, but it wasn't an answer that made sense. So I pretty
copies.
Yep. So I pretty much took one story. It was about plants, gave them a top-down graphic organizer, and saw what they could do with it, saw if they could put in details. I gave the main idea and topic just to see if some students were even more advanced and could already complete it, but none could. I mean, they put stuff in there, but it wasn't correct. So we measured both of them, and overall, a lot of them were able to give me maybe 1 or 2 key details, but then the other ones were kind of irrelevant to the story. Again, with the actual questions, some of them, when they looked at function, they thought of it as being like, what does a leaf do? A leaf blows in the wind, or, so they didn't quite understand function. So it definitely showed me going into it that this lesson is going to be a very prominent lesson, and that there is a lot to learn from it, and that main idea and details is definitely something that we need to focus on in order for them to, in the long run, be able to read stories and summarize, and being able to take information and organize it so they understand what details are and what is important versus what is not. And also just in terms of more long-term in the unit, in order for them to understand like ecosystems and what things are living and non-living in them, they need to be able to understand that a plant is a living thing, and how plants get affected if the climate's changing or if the ecosystem's changing. So it definitely kind of all falls into place. So those were diagnostics. The assessment for Thursday will be measured in the same way. It'll have the story with them filling in the top-down graphic organizer after, the lesson's been taught, and answering the questions about the functions, being able to apply their knowledge for it. But those definitely showed me that this was a lesson that they needed and were ready for.
So you're going to measure, just to recap, you're going to measure the language arts objective with the top-down graphic organizer. And then you're going to measure the science objective with the questions that come afterwards, talking about the functions of the plant.
Yep. Okay. And then next week for week 2, once they've understood the details and applied it to the main idea, then I think their assessments will be more integrated, whereas I really wanted to see if they were able to do this skill first and then this skill too, and then after be able to integrate them together. Just because I really wanted to see those 2 skills defined.
Right.
Especially because it's literally day 2 of the unit. Whereas I would expect that week 2, week 3 in the unit, I would be able to ask a question that applies like both of those skills together in one. So then, in terms of like where we're going, looking at things long term, looking at month 3, which would be October, going back to social studies, the focus for that is going to be for the ELA, text illustrations, text features, recounting myths, so being able to use information that's relevant to understand different text features. And again, this is, I think, directly linked to what we're doing in September's unit. Even though it's about science and focus there, these skills are still things that directly apply to the main idea, and also we're doing cause and effect in the September unit. So in terms of them being able to locate information that's relevant, they need to be able to read something and take details that are important and understand what is important versus not, which goes directly linking to finding key details and determining those. Same with being able to recount myths. So they need to be able to read a myth or a fable or a folktale and be able to recount, which in my terms means to summarize. So being able to like think about that myth, talk about it, so that would go directly along with main idea. The last standard that we're doing for this unit is talking about the connection between sentences and paragraphs and comparing those to the text. So we're focusing on cause and effect for September. They need to be able here to be able to read and see the relationship between that. So that might be a story that has cause and effect, and being able to identify that relationship between sentences, what kind of words you might find. And then just going into the long-term sequence. So, we're really trying to focus on Roosevelt's model of applying in quarter 1 a science and a social studies, quarter 2 science and social studies, quarter 3 science and social studies. And we're trying to make it as focused as we can by spiraling whatever standards they are taking, like for instance doing the main idea and making sure that the next ELA standard directly correlates or is linked to that. And these are all standards that, going through Galileo and thinking about what it is they need, they're huge standards that they're going to be able to need to master by the end of the school year. And you can just see that, like through here on how they... So Roosevelt doesn't really apply ELA standards to each of this, but this is kind of the sequence that they want us to go in, which is exactly what we're doing, and then figuring out the best standards of ELA that would fit with those, okay, and making sure that they spiral from quarter to quarter and that they're making sense.
I'm sorry, I'm on top of your papers.
No, you're totally fine. Okay, so in terms of the actual lesson and what it's going to look like, so breaking down each of the standards. So I broke down each of the standards into objectives and sub-objectives. So for ELA, students will be able to determine key details from a text using a top-down web with 80% mastery. The sub-objectives that they're going to need to do in order to master that skill, first they're going to be able to explain that a detail tells important information about a text. They're going to be able to read a leveled text depending on the student need. They're going to be required to have a sticky note and placing the sticky note in 3 places that they're finding key details. So actually seeing what that is that they're also seeing as important. And then they're going to need to be able to write each of those details in their own words using the top-down graphic organizer. That was also another kind of misconception that I'll talk about later that I noticed in their diagnostics. For science objectives, students will be able to describe the function of the following plant structures: roots, stems, leaves, and flowers with 80% mastery. Again, the sub-objectives to go along with that is first they're going to need to be able to define that a function is a job of a structure. So it's what it does in order to be able to survive. The second thing that they're going to need to understand and explain is that living things have structures with important functions. So everything that a plant has is going to be important to it and its survival. 3, they're going to be able to need to identify each of those plant structures, which is what they will have done the previous day, but that's definitely needed. And then 4th, they're going to need to describe at least one function of each structure: roots, stems, leaves, seeds, and flowers. So in order to start the lesson, we're going to start with a review to make sure that the students are remembering information from the previous day that they've already mastered. We're going to start with doing a showdown, so using a Kagan structure. That'll focus on the structures of a plant. It'll also focus on identifying details. So, for instance, it might have very quickly, like a picture on the board, and they're going to have to write 3 details of the picture. So again, just picking out those important things versus not important. Or I might have a picture of part of the plant, and they have to very quickly write what part of the plant it is. They'll go through showdown. We'll go over that. If there's any problems that I'm noticing that like a lot of people are getting stuck on, that might be something that I revisit just to make sure that they have that mastery level. And then, like I said, we're focusing on, with these units, like an overarching question. So talking about how are plants important to like our survival and our environment. But for Thursday's lesson, we're going to focus on a big question of there's going to be a flower in a vase. So this is going to kind of be like the critical thinking aspect. And the flower is going to be split down the stem. So there's going to be a stem in 2 different vases. And in each vase, there's going to be 2 different food colors. There's going to be a blue and a red. And they're going to have to be able to, so they're just going to observe it first and kind of have it be like the big question of the day. But they're going to be thinking about how, so pretty much what happens when you do that is if you take a white flower and you split the stem down the middle and you put it in a vase with 2 different colors, eventually the flower will dye itself those 2 different colors. And you could do it with 3 or 4, and it's very neat. But again, this goes along with the function of a plant. So knowing that, so they're going to be able to have to take their knowledge that they learn from the day and think about it critically. Like, okay, well, I know that the water is going up through the stem. The stem provides the flower with the water in order to make it grow. And knowing that if the water is just clear, the flower should not be changing colors. But understanding that, like, each function of the plant affects one another. So that's going to be the big question. And then we'll be getting into the instructional aspect. So starting there, I'm going to be modeling the skill. And so we're going to start with really doing it together. We're going to talk about structures and we're going to talk about details. So I'm going to read a story to the students, and as I'm reading, I'm going to be sticky noting details that are important and explaining why and using think alouds to model that. And then I'm also going to do the opposite. I'm going to maybe mark something and then talk about why I think that maybe that is not important. So really going into the depth of detail. And with that, the story is going to be about people and the structures of people, the parts of people. So after we go into the details, I model putting it into a graphic organizer. That's when we're going to start talking about structures of people. So I'm going to use an anchor chart, explain that the structure is a part of something, give them that vocabulary, and then talk about what are the structures of people that we've read about. So talking about ears, nose, eyes, and being able to identify those things. So I'll draw a person, we'll identify those structures, and then they're pretty much going to take those 2 skills that they just learned and then apply it. So they'll be doing the structures, but then, I'm sorry, so I was talking about Wednesday's lesson. Thursday is going to be the functions. So we'll have already talked about the structures. The skill that I'll be focusing on is after we've looked at the structures, now identifying the functions of each of those. So we know that parts of a person, the structures are the eyes, the nose, the ears. Now we need to think about the function. What job do each of those play to help us survive? The eyes help us see things. Why do we need to see? Why is that important? The ears help us hear. Why is that important? So they'll take those skills, understanding what a function is, understanding details, and then they're actually going to go into groups. So in the guided practice, they're going to essentially become the teachers. So they'll start in their guided practice with reading a story about a specific plant structure. So it might be the stem, the leaf, the flower, and it'll be all about the function of that particular part. So they'll partner read. During that partner reading, depending on their level of ability, there's going to be certain students that I'm going to have echo reading because some students may be lower and they're not going to be able to read.
Who's going to do that?
So let me hold on. Oh, here we go. Okay. So like for instance, Destiny. Destiny is very low. She's going to be partnering up, and she'll be echo reading everything that her partner is reading to her. Dairo and Brian are partners. They're both Brian is on grade level, Dairo is not. So they'll also be echo reading, but because Dairo sometimes has difficulty being able to summarize and find details, what I'm going to have Brian do is retell out loud and then having Dairo write notes about what he just heard him say so he can also then access and summarize that information. Same with Xavier. He has a lot of difficulty comprehending like stories at paragraph levels, which is going to be required from the class, like as their partner reading. Jelly will read one paragraph, peanut butter will retell. And then it'll switch partners. But like for instance, Xavier has a really difficult time reading a whole paragraph and then retelling. So for him and his partner, I'm going to ask that they stop at every 1 to 2 sentences and retell what they heard. So that way they're really comprehending and understanding the story. Because if they don't, then they're not going to be able to, mark details that are important, and then be able to access the information and talk about the function.
So you have kids. So this is their SFA levels that you're showing me?
Yep. So, and based on those, so for instance, so I was looking at their levels first of all. So like again, Dairo is in a 2.2 level. So that means he's 1 semester behind grade level. And I've also personally listened to him retell and read stories and noticed that that's something that he struggled with. So that's why I felt like it would be good to pair him up with Brian and have them work together for that guided practice. Who else do we have? Juan will probably be doing the same thing, but for him, he can comprehend and retell, but I might have him also like retelling twice because he gets very distracted as he reads. So it's not that he doesn't understand, but sometimes he's not listening. So making him, even though he might be listening to his partner retell, okay, well, I just heard you retell that this was what it was about, just to make sure that he's really on task and focused. But for partners that are on grade level and I feel like can read strongly, they'll be reading at peanut butter reads, jelly retells. Jelly reads, peanut butter retells, and that'll be the process of that. So they'll retell, they'll go back into their groups, they'll work together in almost a Sage and Scribe format to pick out their details. They'll be marking those with sticky notes. As this is going along, sorry, I feel like I'm kind of jumping around the place. So going back, as I'm modeling, I'm going to be asking questions through time-paired shares. I'm going to be doing think alouds, asking group responses, choral responses based on the type of question to see gradually what the students are understanding at the sub-objective level to know that they're ready to apply that skill that they just learned in order to get to the guided practice. So for instance, if we labeled the structures of a person, I talked about one function of a person, I might then release it. So a function of the eyes is to be able to see. I want you to now time-paired share what is a function of ears. Think about that, talk with your partner, and see if they're able to master, okay, a function is this. That might be another question. Explain in your own words what a function is. So again, making sure that each of those sub-objective levels have been mastered in order to
Is this the sheet you're going to be taking notes on for that?
Yep. Mm-hmm. So I'll be using this not only throughout my modeling, but throughout guided practice too. So this is another portion of the real-time assessment. I broke it into 2, just again to measure each of those sub-objectives and each of the masteries. This one is my ELA, the details. This one is the science.
Do you have these saved? Can I keep these?
Yeah. So again, as I'm teaching, I'm going to be noting like what students am I hearing that are able to retell and talk with their partner and discuss. Noting what students that I called on and were able to give me, that information. And not only will I be doing it during my model to know that they're ready to do it as partners, but I'll also be doing this as I'm facilitating and circulating the guided practice. So again, they'll start out, they'll be partner reading depending on their level of how they're going to be reading. It might be an echo, it might be a choral, the retells might be a little bit different, but I'm going to be walking around seeing what I see and then seeing, are they able to explain that a detail is something important? Were they able to sticky note 3 details that were important? If not, I'm going to be scaffolding those partners and making sure, asking them questions that, can either make them rethink how they were thinking beforehand, or help guide them in the direction that would help their understanding. So I'll be monitoring that through questions. If I'm noticing that kids are like really on top and they're able to do the details, and I might be asking them more of a higher level question. So looking at this whole thing, what do you think it's all about? How would you come up with the main idea?
So what are you going to be putting in these boxes? What goes in there? Just notes, or what do you?
So I do a little bit of both. Sometimes it'll just be like, if right away I see that I walked around and I saw that Edith was able to put 3 sticky notes in the main areas where there were the key details, I might just do a quick check mark to show, yep, she got that easy. If I see like totally right away that like they did it completely wrong, I put an X. And then I might also note on the side, like, what was it that they were doing? And then I base my questions and my kind of facilitating and my participation with them based on that. And then this also not only helps me figure out what are my subgroups, what students need particular elements of the instruction in order to master these 2 standards.
So you gave me a subgroup list earlier.
Yep.
And this is based on the pre-assessment. And
Yep.
then based on this, you'll modify your subgroups.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. So you'll notice that the subgroups are split into 4 groups. Now, not only with the subgroups, but there's also going to be students within those subgroups that have certain modifications and certain particular things that they're going to do to help them reach that mastery level that will apply only to them and not to everyone.
So are those the things you wrote here on this
Yep.
document right here?
Yep. So, okay, let me finish with guided practice, and then we'll talk about getting into that. So, all right, so pretty much after they read, they're going to come up with those details, and then, like I said, they're going to become the teachers of this lesson. I'm not going to teach them what the functions of the plants are. They are going to teach one another what they are. So they're going to come together, and each of the students are going to get a particular role in the lesson. There's going to be 4 roles, and they're kind of based on their levels. So sitting in the seat 1, seat 2, seat 3, seat 4, like we know that seat 3 is usually our lowest seat. A 4 is usually our on grade level. 2 is our kind of lower medium, and then a 1 is our usually strongest academic student. So based on that, they're going to take all the information that they know, and they're going to create an anchor chart that displays this information that they learned in order to teach the class. So ones are going to be the presenters, and I felt like this was important for them because they're usually the most articulate of the group. They're able to apply information and take it and put it into their own words and teach it. So that's why I chose them as the presenters. The number 2s are going to be oh, interesting. I did this one wrong. Okay. This is a little different because I changed it, but for some reason I don't think it updated on my Dropbox. So let me skip around here. Number 3s, the lowest. Those are usually my students that need things that are very hands-on. So they're going to create, and of course with the help of their group, they're going to come up with a whole brain way to teach what the function is. So for instance, going back to like the structure of a human and the function of the ear. So for like a mirror for that, we might do something like the function of the ear is to listen. So they would do that movement to help them understand that function. So the 3s are going to come up with that kinesthetic way to teach what that function is. The 4s are going to scribe and record the functions of the plant part. And then the 2s are going to draw in some kind of pictorial like diagram what that function is that's happening. So like for, again, like an example that I would do with them, for the ear, I'm hearing somebody talk, it's coming in through my ear, my brain lights up, and then I'm able to listen. So that's like a way to understand it through a picture. So they're going to do this as an anchor chart, fill it out, They're going to each have done their key details, so that's something that they all worked on. And then after, they're going to come together, and each of those groups are going to present the information. The number ones will be the presenter, and then as a class, they're going to use a graphic organizer to record and learn this information from their peers.
So they'll have a separate graphic organizer every kid will?
Yep.
Okay.
And then that's where they'll record. We've been making a lot of like foldables and things that they can put all together for the units. So this will become part of that kind of foldable for the unit. So after that, we'll go through that. The kids will be the coaches. They'll ask questions if they don't understand. Maybe they missed something. They'll be teaching it. They'll do the mirrors with the kids. So it'll really be a teaching experience for them, where in that area of the lesson, I'm really just going to be monitoring and facilitating and guiding it in any way that it needs to be guided. But I really hope that it's them learning from one another instead of me teaching that actual standard. Next, after, we're going to go and revisit that big question again. So they're going to look and they're going to take 1 to 2 minutes to journal the big question. We're going to do a numbered heads together format for this. So they're going to observe the plant. They're going to record their ideas in their notebook about what they think happened. And then after, they're going to do a numbered heads together where they'll each share their responses and then come up with what they thought happened as a group, and then we'll share those responses. And then lastly, we'll go into their independent practice. So they'll be given their assessment, and then those questions will be based on details and functions. And then, so now going back, looking at my real-time assessments, seeing what students were able to master these objectives, were able to answer questions correctly, using what I heard from them and my notes, I'll be putting them in each of those subgroups and giving them what they need in order to master the skill. So, for example, there's a couple different assessments, and I'm actually still like modifying them a little. Like, for instance, today Brian was taking his reading assessment, and he was doing it, and he gets really, really stuck on like having something that he reads and then answering questions based on it. Like, that is not his style of learning and of showing his information. But what he can do really well is, for instance, like read a question and then talk about it and then write it down. So that might be something that I might do with him, where I'm sitting with him, he's answering one of the questions, and he's telling me out loud, and then he's writing it down. He also said that like a way that he feels like he accesses information better is through like a fill in the blank question, where he's able to like take what he knows and figure out what's missing based on that. So I might give him that kind of assessment, because that might show me more of what he's able to master rather than this, because he sat and took a test and he wrote nothing for 35 minutes.
Brian has an IEP?
No, he doesn't. So, but it's just a different way of being able for them to show me the information, because
Brian Leal Cervantes?
Yes.
Here I was thinking about Brian Pettis.
Oh,
He's
no.
not in your class
Nope.
this year.
I know. No more. So it's not that like he's getting the information and it's becoming easier in any way. It's just a different way of him to be able to show me what he knows. Okay. Whereas, for instance, Destiny is going to get a completely different assessment, and that's because she does have an IEP for reading and for math. So if you look at her assessment, hers is going to look very different than anybody else in the class. For her, we're still going to focus on details. We're still going to focus on parts of a plant and the functions, but she's going to be doing it in a very different way. So she struggles. Oh, lights out. She struggles with reading in general. I mean, she can barely read the word the, sound letters. I mean, her IEP is getting completely rewritten right now.
Do you have these saved already?
Yep. So because of this, like, for instance, I'm going to give her a picture because I want to see if she can do the skill of telling me details. She's going to look at this picture and she's going to draw what are 3 important things that she sees in this picture. And that's how she's going to show me if she knows what key details are. For plants, I already felt like she was having a difficult time, like, looking at a plant and being able to identify those. So she's going to have that revisited on hers. being able to look at the word, sound it out. After she sounds it out, point and show me where that part is. And then this was kind of like my challenge for her, going back to the movements, because I think she's going to be able to work well with that, showing me the movements that we came up for the functions instead of writing it down, because her writing is also part of her IEP. So hers is going to look very different.
She's the only one with level D subgroup.
Yes. Now, in terms of my students who, again, I was looking at SFA and how they were placed, looking at all of my 2.2 students. Now, they're going to get a very similar exit ticket to somebody who's on grade level, but the level of the reading is going to be based on their reading level. So, for instance, what you're going to notice for the leveled reading, so like talking about photosynthesis, I feel like most kids that are on grade level would either be able to apply what they're reading and understand what that is, whereas like here it's actually explained. Like photosynthesis is when plants use the sun and they use it to eat, and that's how, and just using it in simplistic words where it's more understandable and comprehensible. For instance, they talked about nutrients. So instead of having nutrients in here, because most of them can't even read that word, talking about nutrients as the food that they're using. So making the reading comprehensible to their level, but still having them do the same skills. They still need to be able to show me 3 details. They're still going to need to be able to answer the questions and get the information that they learned from the lesson. Now, level group B is like an on-grade level. Those are the students that are reading on grade level or above, and they're using something that is completely on grade level reading and completing those skills. So it's a little bit more difficult. They might, need to clarify words that they're not understanding, but it should be a challenge, but something that's attainable. Also for the students that are on like a 3.2, I might have them like do the details, but then give me the main idea and give me the topic and see if they can do that, because they are at a higher level of reading right now in terms of SFA and where we're at. But I really didn't even focus on like a completely different challenge, because I thought, if anything, because the students were so low when I gave them their diagnostic, that if anything, the challenge would really be them being able to identify the main idea and the topic based on their details, and then maybe doing one extra critical thinking question that may just go into a higher level thinking if I feel like kids are ready to be placed into a subgroup A. And then just going back, like a couple other things that like I was noticing in terms of more of individual students. Brian's probably going to need some extra time to complete his assessment. He takes a very, very long time. For Xavier, I might have him, again, as he's reading this story, stopping at each of the sentences and talking out loud, what did he just read? Stopping again, what did he just read? Stopping again, so he's able to do that skill. Cruz, same thing. I probably am going to ask him to retell it every sentence. Alexis is probably going to need more time and probably that proximity. Like I'm going to need to be there next to him in order for him to complete that. Juan T gets very distracted, so I will put him somewhere where he can really just focus on the exit ticket in order to be successful. And then possibly maybe for Brian doing a fill in the blank and seeing if that works for him based on that. In terms of content accessibility, again, using pictures, using analogies, so talking about structures as people, if they're still not getting that, maybe talking about giving another like example. What is a car? What are the structures of it? What are the functions of a wheel? What are the functions of a mirror? So giving those kind of real world examples. Some misconceptions that I was noticing along with my diagnostic was noticing that like students are thinking that a function is just something that it does, but it's a function is more than just that. It's a job. So really going in depth to what would happen if a car didn't have wheels? Why is that such an important function of a car to have wheels and that they move? Because you wouldn't be able to drive anywhere. So going into those examples that make sense to them so they're really understanding what a function is. And as needed, I'll go through as many examples until they're really understanding that particular vocabulary word. Identifying details that are relevant versus irrelevant. So just again, going and modeling and really discussing through pair discussions about what is a key detail versus what is not, and going through examples and really making them explain why that would be a key detail and not. Another thing is putting it into their own words. Some of the kids were able to give me 3 details, but they took it directly from the story and rewrote it. So to me, that's not them understanding it. To me, that's them copying it. So really going into taking a sentence and looking at how I'm putting in my own words and how those two things are different. The different words that I'm going to use versus a story, and providing them with that example. Going to be using PowerPoints to do the reviews. The whole brain teaching of a function we'll do the whole brain teaching of each function. They're going to do like in student-led instruction throughout it. They're going to do the numbered heads, varying levels of exit tickets based on their groups and based on individual needs. I really think correct level of difficulty. That was really based on their diagnostic, so where they were at and moving forward with what I'm noticing that they need. So, like for example, if I'm noticing that there was somebody who I thought was going to be in the subgroup C needing assistance, that instead of pulling them for like the exit ticket and going maybe through doing one key detail and then gradually releasing them, I might notice that they're doing really well throughout the lesson and that's something that they're actually getting, and be able to move them from a C to a B, them doing it completely independently. Based on that's not difficult for them anymore. Again, maybe if I notice that Destiny is really understanding the functions of the plant, instead of having her give me the movements, maybe I'll try to have her give me explanations. So just adjusting that based on what I'm seeing throughout the lesson, and moving students into what it is that they need based on what I'm seeing.
Wow. I see that you have this very organized here based on the 4 elements that I'm scoring. I feel like at this point I do have enough evidence to score you, but if you really feel like there's something super important for any of these that you haven't shared, let me know. Do you feel like I'm... So they are task analysis, content accessibility, real-time assessment, and correct level of difficulty.
Not really. As far as content accessibility, I feel like the only thing that maybe I hadn't mentioned is that, like, for day 1 to really start building background, we're actually going to be going outside and observing different plants and talking about where are we seeing these plants, what do they look like, what are you noticing about them, talking about where do you see plants in your life. So building that background, that'll kind of be day 1, and then going into the actual academic part, and then talking about the real world on Friday. Which they'll know.